Roman Daisy here, back with another video about the Middle-earth role-playing game, or MERP as it's called, by Iron Crown Enterprises. Today we're going to look at Moria, the Dwarven city. This is the campaign module number 2900 in the series. And this is a first edition book. And I bought this way back in the 80s at a place called Endless Adventure and selling role-playing games at the time. And I was really stoked to get this. Really excited to get Mines of Moria because I've always liked the dwarves in The Hobbit and the Dwarven armies that they had, and thought this would be one of the coolest campaign settings you could possibly get. Now, if you watch the Ralph Bakshi version of Lord of the Rings, where they go through Moria, it's pretty cool and it's pretty faithful to what actually happened in the book. The Peter Jackson version went off on a lot of tangents, but as far as Middle-earth role-playing goes, this was an excellent scenario because Moria was pretty accessible. It was after the dwarves fled. As you could get in, if you knew what you were doing, you could get in through the west gate, though it takes some thought there, or you could definitely get through the east gate. It was more open. So it's definitely a place you could go, and there was so many things you can explore, so many different levels. It was just vast. And then of course you have your Balrog. Now this didn't come with any area maps, so no regional overviews. It does detail the city of Khazad Dum, which is what the Dwarven city was called, the 7 deeps, levels and sub-levels, maps, cross-section diagrams of both the city and the mines. You get diagrams of traps, machines and stuff, and large detailed floor plans. So you get the Chamber of Mazarbul, the Endless Stair, Durin's Bridge, and the entry halls. And then you get, of course, information about the dwarves and Durin's tribe, as well as 3 orc tribes and many creatures who inhabit Moria. And of course you get the Balrog. So there's the back. The back, not much to see. It just shows you what modules have already came out. So this will be the 7th one in the line, as we've already gone through all these 6. And then they also have these adventure modules down below, which we'll get into later, as well as the Peter Fenlon map of Middle-earth. So let's delve into this book for a minute. So it does give you a sectional breakdown of Moria and its environs. So you get the Misty Mountains, Dimrill Dale, the East Gate, and the Celebrant. And then you also have the West Gate and the Saranen, and the road that goes over the Carahadras. And then you have the cross section where you see there are basically 7 deeps and 7 levels, as well as the underdeeps. So they do give you the definitions and terms again, the guidelines, adapting this module to your campaign, all that other stuff. Again, converting stats. Nothing new there with the very beginning of the book from any other book. Then it starts going into the introduction to Moria, which is called the Black Chasm. It got called that because in the Second Age, when the elves were fleeing Eregion, the dwarves shut their doors because they were afraid there was so many refugees pouring through those gates that something bad might happen, and either Saronic forces would get in behind them and they wouldn't be able to stop them, or that the refugees themselves would cause a lot of damage just going through. Galadriel, she'd been there many times in the Second Age. She went through there. Now Gandalf's been there before the Lord of the Rings. He was there once. He made a trip from east to west, and so did Aragorn. Aragorn actually went in there too, but that was back when there was no dwarves. Then they give you right off the list of things that heal and harm, which is good. So they give you a layout of the land. Dimrill Dale and Lorien, Eregion, the Misty Mountains. Then you got the climate and ecology. Climate doesn't change much when you're in tunnels, unless you're near like open vents and stuff like that. And then it has plant life and animal life, because there would be some form of things living in tunnels. And then you got things that heal and things that harm. And it mentions the chamber birds, cave bears, cavern wings. So pretty ferocious bats and rats in there. Shrews, then dire wolves are on the outside, red jaws, walt strike. There's going to be fish in the streams and that. So it gives you the ecology. Every book does this. And that's kind of cool, because then you can adapt it to your campaign. Then it goes into the next one, the brief history of the founding of Khazad Dûm and the building of Durin's mansion. So they're taking most of this in context with Professor Tolkien's work, which is good. And they describe the migration patterns of the dwarves of Belagros and Nogrod, the 2nd and 3rd tribe, who became well known in the First Age, and then the Durin's tribe, which was the first among equals. And it gives all the various migration routes of dwarves of Durin. So anyone knows anything about the movie know that Moria was known mostly for mithril silver or true silver, though they found lots of other stuff. And then it goes into the history of the Khazad, including their interaction with the Lord of Gifts and the Rings of Power. Because Durin, the king, he also was given a ring of power, a dwarven one, and it just inflamed his greed, which might have also caused the closing of the doors back in the Second Age War. So then it has the coming of the Balrog. The Balrog got out just because they delved too deep for Mithril. It was getting harder to find, and they moving down deeper into the earth, and they broke into the Underdeeps and unearthed the sleeping Balrog that had fled from the days of the First Age. And it talks about the settlement of the Lonely Mountain and the Grey Mountains, the great war between the dwarves and orcs, because Thror went in there by himself and got his head chopped off by Azog, and Azog got killed by Dane Ironfoot, who was a young one. That's one thing I didn't like about Peter Jackson's Hobbit movie, is that they brought Azog back to life, and it shouldn't have been. So it talks about Moria in the later years, the loss of Durin's ring, which Thrain lost in Dol Guldur when he was taken prisoner, and then Thorin's quest for Erebor, Balin, the return to Moria, and then obviously the Fellowship of the Ring and Gandalf killing the Balrog, which now even things out in terms of could Moria ever be reoccupied, and then the end of the Third Age. And then it gives you a slightly less detailed timeline. Then it goes to talk about the dwarves in more detail, physical characteristics, manner, dwarf women, and the Tolkien wrote about they would also have. And then it gives Durin's line. It also gives you the Khazad language and the Angathos runes that they used. They didn't use Fëanorian runes too much. And they also have worship and ritual. And then Durin's folk. By the Third Age, Durin's folk were not only there because many dwarves from Belegost and Nogrod from the second and third tribe, they had fled the drowning of Beleriand and settled. So there was kind of like a golden age there where they were just tunneling so deep, the three kindreds together. And this one I like, they go into Dwarven technology, something that Tolkien never really explained. He just said they were master smiths and builders, but he never really went into any detail. So the writers obviously went into stuff, looked at techniques, non-fiction and fictional techniques, smelting, forging, mold works, wire works. That's one thing Peter Jackson did in The Hobbit. He did pretty good. He depicted how they might have done some certain things in the Lonely Mountain scenes. Talks about cold forging machines. It also gives a little story here about an elf who got a tour of Moria, and they were talking various smithing techniques. And it was like a back and forth between the dwarf and the elf. And then we go into works of power like light stones, watchers and stones, because Gimli mentioned in Lord of the Rings how Moria used to be lit with lamps, marvelous lamps, and this was how it was done, because Sam asked how they ever see in this place. Then they go into Dwarven Warcraft, which I really loved. I love this section. Talks about helms, greaves, shields, swords, axes, all that fun stuff. Formations and organizations, so it does give you the Dwarven military organization and how many there were and how they were divided. Something Tolkien never bothered about. And then we have, of course, Dwarven trade, how they work with that. And then the structure of the Dwarven city. You got light and water, windows, spring halls, cisterns. Because when you're tunneling, you're going to find a whole bunch of underground streams and rivers. So this book goes into a lot of detail just about the city itself and the background. Like we're already on page 33 and we haven't even talked about any campaigns or anything like that. Like we got minerals, all the metals you can find, and all the ones you can actually make. Eog, mithril, then there's also stonework, construction methods, building philosophy, building techniques, stonework, architectural themes, and then of course you have the East Gate, a detail about that, and of course the doors of Durin, the West Gate, which is prominent in Lord of the Rings, both the Bocce version and the Peter Jackson version. Then of course you have other passageways, and they give you an idea of what some of these passageways might look like a road with intersection with stairs, or an avenue with a rail cart. Access ways, ceremonial chambers with a burial, crypts. There would have been places that were full of crypts. Dwarf lodgings, dungeons in the Seventh Deep, a gathering hall, much like the Fellowship stayed in the one night, and then guard chambers as well. A treasury, and even a swivel bridge, which is kind of cool because you got going across the chasm, You got 3 roads connecting. So it does talk about drawbridges, fixed arches, swivel bridges, chasms. So all sorts of fun stuff. Then it goes into the traps, because the dwarves would have trapped certain areas to keep thieves out. So they talk about plate traps, dart traps, spike traps, steam traps, pit traps, wheel traps. All sorts of fun stuff. Of course, after they abandoned the city, orcs would have tripped all these things eventually. Then we go into the evil inhabitants, section 5. So you got orcs and trolls. And it gives you some fictional orc tribes. Now Bocce, his version of Lord of the Rings was pretty detailed. He had orcs in his. Peter Jackson, for some reason, threw goblins. I hated the goblins of Moria in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Yeah, they were cool looking, but they're just, A, too many of them, and B, they were not supposed to be goblins. They're supposed to be orcs of Moria. The orcs are actually from Mordor. Sauron had started peopling Moria with his own creatures. The Balrog didn't care, because who was going to take on the Balrog? It also mentions trolls, because there are cave trolls buried deep. It mentions other beasts like a cave worm and a drake, and of course, like a water drake. And then of course you got the Watcher on the water. Then it goes into detail about the Balrog, the nature of Durin's Bane, and how they first met him. Gives you the powers of the Balrog, his abode, the kingdom of the Balrog. It's funny that the Balrog never left Moria. It's one of those things that kind of scratch your head. The power of Lorien might have kept him out, because Galadriel would have one of the elven rings of power, and that might have been enough to keep him contained within the realm of Moria. And I guess he never, too big to get through the west gate, to go through all that area. But he could have got out the east gate and flown over the mountains or something. So you got to wonder what he was doing. Then finally we get to the Moria's layout, the mines. And it gives you a specific places of note, typical rooms, the city plan, random features, the tiers, the mines. And finally we get to the second hall in Durin's Bridge, where these two guys had their epic fight. And I kind of like this. And then it gives you the bigger view of the first deep and first level. And all the numbers, they give you a certain room. Some of them are mentioned in Lord of the Rings itself, or in Tolkien's other writings, but for the most part they're made up. The most prominent would, of course, the West Gate, the Western Entry Hall, West Gathering Hall, East Gate, the Red Horn Way, stuff like that. Anything mentioned in Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, would be there. So you have the West Gate and the West Entry Hall, East Entry Hall, and then finally you're on the second level. Again, the writers made up a lot of stuff to make it interesting, and it gives you a schematic of all the main passageways. And then as you go up, the third level, fourth level, fifth level, and the seventh level. So the Chamber of Records was on the seventh level, because they had windows where you could see. And then it gives you a description of the Chamber of Records. Peter Jackson's version didn't have a very good Chamber of Records layout. They didn't follow the book faithfully when they designed it. And then you go to the second deep, and you start going to the deeps, the third deep, fourth deep, fifth deep. They have something in the fifth deep called the domes. And then finally you're at the Balrog's lair in the sixth deep. Now, Tolkien never mentioned where the Balrog actually lived, so the writers are making this one up in the sixth deep. Then they finally have the seventh deep and the Chamber of Teeth, as well as the King's Chamber and Armory on the seventh deep. 7 being a mystical number among dwarves. And then finally they give you an even bigger one. They give you Durin's Chimney and the Endless Stair, which is kind of cool. So Gandalf fell all the way from the first level down into the Underdeeps, and then him and the Balrog fought and climbed their way up to the Durin Stair all the way to the top and burst out. And it gives you the 7th deep there too, that one. And finally just the description of the Underdeeps and the peaks above. So then it finally gets into adventure. So choosing a time period is important. Using traps and items and encounters. And then it gives you the adventures. So it gives you a date, 1640, after the Great Plague. Embassy to the Dwarven King. And it gives you a description of that one. A mission to steal in 1640. So that's usually the basic timeline of any MERP campaign, is 1640. And then you can also do a year 3000, shortly after Balin went in. Exploration expedition, or the search for Balin. And then after the War of the Ring, you can do the quest for Durin's legacy and the closing of the Underdeeps in the Fourth Age. So that's kind of cool. It gives you different scenarios that way. And then finally you also have the master military charts. We already saw the Dwarven one, but they do it again, and they also give the orcs. And and the Balrog's troops, supposedly. So you get that. Then you get the Master non-player character, Master Beast chart, Master Encounter chart, and then a glossary of terms, and as well as credits. So the author designer of this was Peter Fenlon. Peter Fenlon is one of the driving forces behind this game system. He also designed a lot of the maps, especially the world map. Jessica Ney has also mentioned this. She later becomes one of the chief editors. But Pete Fenlon, I think Pete Fenlon actually went and did when the movies came out, he helped design the new role-playing game for that, which I never really liked. And then you have a product listing, because Iron Crown did have other things like Roll Master and Space Master, so they did other stuff too. And then you have at the very back cover, you have the Westgate post to 2990 of the Third Age, and then you have the Dimrill Dale, and that's it. That's it. That's pretty cool. I love playing this with friends because you can wander around looking for stuff, getting into trouble. Using the dwarves' military tables was kind of cool, because what would have happened had Moria, had the Dwarven King sent their army to help Arthedain in his struggle with Angmar at any time, or if they'd come out and helped the Gondorians out east, would have helped a lot. But the dwarves decided to stay put and didn't do much, which is a shame because trade collapsed soon after the fall of Arthedain, and then it really collapsed when the Balrog showed up. It's one of those things, but it was definitely one of the, so far of the series of 7 campaign modules, it's been the best one, I find. So much detail was in it, and it's always fun looking for treasure in a Dwarven Hall. Just ask Bilbo. Anyway, that's all I have on the Mines of Moria. They did do a 3rd edition of this, and I'll get into that later. But until next time, this is Roman Daisel. I'm out of here.